means you can make mistakes and just keep going and have a human experience on this planet.
To be human is to be inclusive. It means to include older people as well as younger people. It means to think laterally and redefine our lives in different ways, not be bound by the stereotypes of today.
Ladies first.
What does it mean to be human? To be kind and respectful, and to be inclusive, and because we all bleed the same blood.
To be together, to be one, to belong. That's what it means to be human.
For me, what it means to be human is two things. It's knowing and it's showing. It's knowing the world around you and understanding people, nature, everything that we can see in the universe. I think that's a deeply human thing, to try and understand what we see around us. But it's also not just knowing that and gathering all this knowledge, but showing that, displaying that with the unique gifts and abilities that we have. Every single person is different and has a different way of showing the beauty of the world that we live in.
What does it mean to be human? What is the human experience? What is the basis for how we understand and experience our humanity? If this is your first time here, make sure and hit that subscribe button and click the bell so that you never miss a video or an interview. Our goal is to help you enter into a confirmed, confident, and eternal relationship with the source of all life and purpose. Does the phrase human experience reveal more than meets the eye? See, as a Christian, the phrase human experience is actually a pretty accurate assessment of life here on earth. In fact, C.S. Lewis wrote, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Now, like I said, I can hear many saying that's a false conclusion, and you may still end up arriving at that conclusion. You're free to do so. That's your right. But let's see why Mr. Lewis had this thought. He wrote, the Christian says creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and to help others to do the same. Additionally, in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, the Apostle Paul says it like this: "For we know that if our earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal dwelling in the heavens, not made with hands. Indeed, we groan in this tent, desiring to put on our heavenly dwelling, since when we are clothed, we will not be found naked. Indeed, we groan while we are in this tent, burdened as we are, because we do not want to be unclothed but clothed, so that mortality may be swallowed up by life. Now the one who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave us the Spirit as a down payment." So Paul calls our bodies an earthly tent. And in the Greek, the word oikia, it means a house or a dwelling. See, the body is kind of the department or habitation for the soul. And hear this: who you are is your soul. You have a body. Now, this doesn't mean that you are not your body that you and others see every day. It simply means you're more than that. Now, in our present culture, one fundamental thing that seems to be up in the air, increasingly up in the air, is a question that seems most people can't fully answer, which is, what does it mean to be human? So what I want to do is give 3 quick points to consider. We are intellectual creatures. We're intellectual creatures. We're capable of rational thought, reflection, intentionality, and the capacity to use our minds to apprehend truth. The intellectual, therefore, focuses on the virtue of truth. Now, one issue I see often when speaking with atheists or naturalists is not that they don't have good answers, but that worldview doesn't even allow justification for asking the questions. For example, if, as Richard Dawkins has claimed, we're just dancing to the tune of our DNA, how would that lead naturally to being able to have advanced reasoning processes? And I think that sometimes when naturalism is taught, there's an idea that molecules and life forms have a desire to become more advanced. But I don't have all the time in this video to fully outline that, but Michael Behe has written a lot about the internal flaw in this line of thinking. In fact, in one of his books, Darwin Devolves, he outlines how Darwinian evolution, if true, would not lead to more complex organisms because, among other reasons, in order to survive, it is best for organisms to conserve energy and remain simple. Now, there's many other issues, but that's one of them. Let's imagine the 8-part classification system that we all learned in science class in school. So we have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And if we represent that with this monetary value, there's 8 digits here. But scientists have shown that evolution only has the potential to affect the level of the sense. In fact, after 2 million years of intense selection, after eons of the most fierce evolution, that finish, ancestor, and descendants differ in only the pennies and dimes columns. Say from 213,754 to 36 cents to 213,754 to 83 cents. Millions of years of selection have left the finches very, very close to where they started. Now, part of what it means to be human is rooted in what it means to not be something else or have that capacity. But when I think of the specified complexity of DNA, where it's been noted and shown that in one cell of an amoeba there's more information than in 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica, it seems to fly in the face of logic to suggest that simple evolutionary processes could be responsible for that amalgamation of information. And the information within each DNA chain is so specific to each individual, yet all individuals possess the same basic material. Let's look deeper at the material itself and what information itself actually is. Dr. Werner Gitt, an IT specialist and engineer, has labeled 5 levels of information transmission. They are statistics, cosyntax, semantics, pragmatics, and apologetics. The lower levels would be akin to maybe your dog sitting on your keyboard and whatever comes out is what comes out. According to Shannon's theory, any random sequence of symbols is regarded as information, without regard to its origin or whether it is meaningful or not. When we move to the cosyntax at the second level, we're only concerned with the actual sets of symbols or codes or rules that are governing the way that these things are assembled into sequences or into grammar or vocabulary. At the third level is semantics. It is the meaning that changes a sequence of symbols into information at this level. So now, at the third level is the only level we've arrived at where meaning is even a factor in the equation of the information. At the fourth level is pragmatics. Now, up to the semantic level, the purpose that the sender has with the transmitted information is not considered. But from the Greek word pragmatica, this is the art of doing the right thing. Information is able to cause the recipient to take some action. In other words, it's a two-way street at this point. And then finally, we arrive at the level of apologetics. At this level, we now realize that any piece of information has a purpose. Purpose denotes intent. And then we come to this highest and last level of information where the teleological aspect, the question of the purpose, derived from the Greek word apomenon, which means result or success or conclusion, is now being considered. So the highest level, apologetics, involves request with an expectation of a response. But guess what? DNA is information at the level of apologetics. So the naturalists would have us to believe that a set of specified instructions that tell an organism how to think, live, breathe, move, and act would be from a random set of forces and not from a messenger. Had the opportunity with some of my friends to go to the Bahamas last year, and we were there. I was on the beach, and I took the time to write this message in the sand. Now, let me ask a question. If I didn't tell you that, and you were walking along the beach one morning, the morning after I wrote that, and there's nobody else on the beach, no people to be found, no humans in sight, would you assume that the waves washed onto the shore and wrote that message, or would you assume that the message is the result of a mind? In other words, you didn't see me write it, but what do you assume, and what do you always know to be true about messages? It's this: messages that we see, hear, or receive always come from messengers which have minds. We understand that messages come from minds. We have the most complex system of messages ever devised, which speaks to the complexity of the mind that could have devised them. It speaks to the complexity of the messenger that could devise such messages. And I submit to you that it is our relationship with that messenger that gives our lives true meaning. In fact, former atheist Antony Flew, one of the most prominent atheistic philosophers of the 20th century, came to believe in God, even if he didn't go all the way to Christianity, partially because of the DNA evidence. He stated that in keeping his lifelong commitment to go where the evidence leads, he now believed in the existence of God. He said, "What I think the DNA material has done is that it has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements to work together. We have the capacity to think and grow intellectually because we are derived from the greatest mind that ever existed." Second, as far as what it means to be human, we are moral creatures. Now, I could spend the whole rest of the video just on this one topic, and I've done other videos on morality and on the moral argument, and you can go check those out. But human beings are moral creatures. We have a conscience. We feel the pull of the moral ought or the moral should. As moral agents, we weigh our duties and seek ethical goodness. So the moral, therefore, focuses on the virtue of goodness. Now, Dawkins has famously said we're just dancing to the tune of our own DNA and that there is nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. No rhyme or reason, but he's also realized that that means or might mean that morality is just a myth. It means life having meaning is probably just a myth. But if that's true, then why should he care or anyone care what anyone believes about God or anything else? Now, Richard Dawkins also wrote, "Whether irrational or not, it does unfortunately seem plausible that if somebody sincerely believes God is watching his every move, he might be more likely to be good. I must say I hate the idea. I want to believe that humans are better than that. I'd like to believe I'm honest whether anyone is watching or not." In an interview with the Times at the Cheltenham Festival, he said that people may feel free to do bad things because they feel God is no longer watching them. However, if we're just dancing to our DNA, then no one can ultimately be held responsible for his or her actions. And evil becomes a term without an ontic or actual point of reference. Most of the questions of today actually boil down to moral inquiries, oftentimes, as opposed to scientific ones, as used to be the case. So getting morality wrong has had, is having, and will have severe consequences. There was a tract given out to people that read, "Religion and science are opposed, but only in the same sense in which my thumb and forefinger are opposed. And between the two, one can grasp everything." See, when there's no God in the paradigm, the whole idea of morality can be very confusing. Even atheist J.L. Mackie recognized the dilemma in how he could know the proper moral standard based on his naturalistic worldview. See, in one book he writes, there are no objective values. But then elsewhere he writes, we might well argue that objective, intrinsically prescriptive features supervenient upon natural ones constitute so odd a cluster of qualities and relations that they are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. Many people tend to believe in the general goodness of man. But history and evidence and honesty about our own hearts all betray this idea. Sam Harris, an atheist who is both a philosopher and neuroscientist, has much to say on how humans can arrive at life-sustaining moral standards simply through biological evolution. He writes, many people imagine that the theory of evolution entails selfishness as a biological imperative. This popular misconception has been harmful to the reputation of science. In truth, human cooperation and its attendant moral emotions are fully compatible with biological evolution. Well, Harris seems to ignore the fact that his colleague, Richard Dawkins, wrote a book entitled The Selfish Gene. In it he writes, let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. Let us understand what our own selfish genes are up to because we may then at least have the chance to upset their designs, something that no other species has ever aspired to do. Apparently not all naturalists share the perspective of Mr. Harris. There's also another very subtle flaw with this or similar thinking. See, we would have to already have access to the correct morality in order to know if we should upset our genes so that we can make sure that our genes guide us to live properly. But as is often the case in naturalism, Dawkins is assuming a moral code, and epistemic access means he knows how he knows access to such a code, which means he would confidently be able to acquire and understand this moral code, even though he and his genes are the very thing preventing him from accessing such a moral code. In fact, he would almost have to have an out-of-body experience, or I guess out-of-mind experience, for this to happen objectively. In essence, he'd have to be God. It should also be noted that many scientists, most notably biochemist Michael Behe, have shown a flaw in the premise being proposed by Harris in regard to the selfishness of biological evolution. Now, with regards to the underlying theory contained within Harris's assertion, Behe writes in Darwin Devolves about two groups of extended evolutionary synthesis scientists, that's a tongue twister, who propose a similar theory. The first speculates that once master genes and their regulatory networks of connections were in place, perhaps novel, complex features could be developed, mostly by random changes that accidentally form new signature sequences near various genes. The second group emphasizes the ease of deploying an array of machinery to different locations, which, like ectopic fly eyes, would generate a lot of variation much more easily than Darwin might have imagined. Maybe that would give selection more to choose from. If all that sounds distressingly vague, I'm afraid that is the gist of the argument. The unanticipated discovery of layers of control, master switches, and the stunningly sophisticated genetic regulatory networks they activate does not make the putative, undirected development of life any easier to explain. Evo-devo, or evolutionary developmental biology, enthusiasts seem to imagine. It makes it harder. The need for a foreman and subcontractors to coordinate construction does not make it easier to explain how unintelligent processes could make a building out of bricks and wood and pipes and wiring. It shows it to be impossible. So let me break this down for you. Behe is indicating that an external infusion of sorts, in fact, a number of external infusions, would be required in order to advance biological evolution. Who or what could that source be? If not God, it seems unlikely that unintelligent and unguided natural forces could be responsible for natural evolution, not to mention moral evolution. Additionally, Sam Harris simply assumes that human cooperation and its attendant moral emotions would be natural outgrowths of a macroevolutionary process. Harris goes on to write, the work of evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers, Reciprocal Altruism, has gone a long way toward explaining cooperation among unrelated friends and strangers. Because moral virtue is attractive to both sexes, it might function as a kind of peacock's tail, costly to produce and maintain, but beneficial to one's genes in the end. So even if we accept Harris's premise that moral virtue is attractive or beneficial, it still does not allow us to assign an objective value to what morality is in its essence. How are we to know if what we are attracted to in another is being accurately perceived as high moral character? What standard are we comparing their moral virtue to in order to determine where they measure up? How do we define what is most beneficial to us or to humanity at large? Now, these are metaphysical, which is the branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality, including the first principles of something, or being, or existence, or identity. Metaphysics refers to the studies of what cannot be reached through objective studies of material reality. questions that cannot simply be reduced to physical or naturalistic foundations. In reviewing the works of C.S. Lewis, David Baggett noted, moral language today is so peculiar, in fact, that Lewis suggests that this is why many people try to explain it away. Some attempt to reduce moral impropriety to an instrumental matter, as we do with a tree for our purposes. It does not shade us well and is, for this reason and in this sense, a bad tree. Now, regarding Harris's premise that human cooperation and moral propriety would be natural outgrowths of macroevolution, Mav Rhodes highlights a flaw in such thinking. Mav Rhodes puts forth the following syllogism. It is in everyone's best interest, including mine, presumably, for everyone, including me, to be moral. B. It is in my best interest for everyone, including me, to be moral. C. It is in my best interest for me to be moral. However, premise C is flawed. See, a more accurate conclusion for C would be C prime. It is in my best interest for me to be moral as long as everyone else is moral. See, the argument thus serves to show that it is in a given person's interest to be moral only on the assumption that everyone else in the world is moral. Now, although most people behave in ways that people of all worldviews would deem as moral, there is far from any guarantee that enough individuals, communities, or countries will not derail the system by eschewing their moral obligations. And if they do, there needs to be a plumb line, a center point, or a point to ground a moral standard so that everyone can be held to account when necessary. And a third factor in what it means to be human that I'd like you to consider is that we are aesthetic creatures. Now, this one may be new for many of you watching. There's a uniqueness in our ability to imagine. Other species don't seem to possess the range of creativity that we possess. Even when we see ingenuity in other species, it seems to be capped or confined to the design or goal-directedness of that species. We humans have the ability to appreciate beauty in art, architecture, and each other. We appreciate the design we see. And even though some, like Richard Dawkins, have said that things only have the appearance of design, I would say sometimes things are as they appear. Additionally, our creative and imaginative capacities far exceed those of other life forms, and only humans are able to not be bound by the goal-directedness inherent in other species. See, the reality of goal-directedness in the sense that a species has a specific plan and goal built into it, wherein scientists have determined that there are genetic limits that do not allow any species other than human beings to rise above the limits of their biological or mental capacity, it's noteworthy. Even in studies that demonstrated the capacity to learn new tasks in chimpanzees or dolphins or domesticated animals, the biological limits of these species do not afford them the ability to imagine or create anything not within their environmental or biological paradigm. There is stark difference between the instinct-guided thought process present in other life forms and the freedom to conceptualize advanced concepts, creations, philosophical realities that humans possess. Science can tell us a lot, but it can't tell us everything. A fourth component of what it means to be human, this is a bonus, is that we are spiritual creatures. We feel compelled to ask deep philosophical and even religious questions. An intuition of God and a desire to be in right relationship with the divine characterizes the lives of the vast majority of people, even the ones that don't want to admit it. And there are many people who have a desire to claim some level of spirituality without acknowledging God, but the point is that there is something in them that cries out for that reality. So misunderstanding or misappropriating what it means to be human actually causes us to live beneath our full capacity and without a fully grounded meaning in life. The most important things in a culture often go without being said. But however, this can sometimes have the effect of not enabling people to examine the foundations upon which their beliefs stand. And it gets even more lost once we begin to build tangents on those beliefs. For example, many people appeal to their human rights or their inherent human value, and while I affirm and believe that everyone should affirm the humanity that exists in each of us, the question should be asked, how do we know we have human value? How can we be certain of who we are or what we are? Are we simply the product of blind evolutionary processes, or are we created with value from the start? Now, these may seem like theological questions or ancillary thoughts, meaning that some people think this sort of question can be passed down the road. But I would like to suggest that however we answer this question is actually foundational to how we know and understand questions that proceed throughout life. How do we know the proper moral standard? How do we know the meaning of life? Ironically, it seems like many people tend to lower the threshold for determining truth or abandon it altogether when we're trying to answer life's biggest questions. What does it mean to be human? We do research on the new phone or the computer to see if it will meet our needs or maintain its durability. We do research on what school to attend. Some even do research on their favorite music artist or athlete or recipe. And that's all well and good, but in the end, none of that will matter. We can attend a great school but still miss the mark on morality. Our team could win the championship, but that won't fulfill our purpose in life. Knowing what it means to be human and to live the human experience will actually enable us to be useful humans as we live this life. In fact, many note that if humanity were aligned with its source of existence, namely God, then we could curate and care for the world and each other in the way in which God intended. This would mean there would be enough resources for everyone. Richter writes, progress would not necessitate pollution. Expansion would not demand extinction. The privilege of the strong would not necessitate the deprivation of the weak. And humanity would succeed in these goals because of the guiding wisdom of God. Some naturalistic theories about humanity reduce what it means to be human to progress or function. In other words, humans learn to plant crops. Humans learn to use tools. Humans learn to control the elements in the earth. But being human is something more foundational and more essential than that. Now, an article in the Reno Gazette Journal, the article is entitled, "What Does It Mean to Be Human?" Now, it begins, being human is complex. To many, being human means being a complicated machine, having higher cognition, using our hands, possessing the power of technology and reasoning ability, having the ability of language, standing upright, and possessing a big brain. Others point to the capability of creation and destruction, having a sense of right and wrong, being morally responsible, relying on our emotions, sharing, ruling others, striving to look for life's deeper meaning, and being uniquely crafted by God for a purpose. A few other viewpoints about this issue. It is a mystery. It is thrilling to be alive, but it can be scary and troubling also for many. We are a medley of good and wicked, hope and gloom, success and failure, etc. We are semi-divine and we are here to glorify God. We need to be fully present to relish pure joy. Some find the question itself is problematic and selfish and pointless. The whole concept can be confusing and chaotic for many. Countless people are worried, what happens to us after we die? We asked our panel, what does it mean to be human? Now, one of those panelists, a man named Daniel Mugenborg, who's a bishop in Roman Catholic Diocese in Reno, had this to say. The human being is created in God's image and has both a physical body and an eternal soul. It is the soul which distinguishes humans from other animals and gives rise to the distinctively human attributes of intellect and will. The gift of our intellect gives us the ability to reason, discern, and know the truth. Our intellect reaches its greatest fulfillment when we come to know God. The gift of our will is the source of our true freedom, by which we can choose what is good and reject what is evil. All of our actions arise from the exercise of our free will, and the ultimate expression of our will is when we choose to love and follow God. Although the effective exercise of these attributes may vary from one person to the next, our human dignity is based not on our function, but on our nature. Well said. This topic requires a lot of time, thought, and attention. But I hope this video provides some insights to consider, as well as some kind of grounding for living the human experience to the best of our ability. But I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think it means to be human? And what ways do you see culture kind of confusing this issue? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And until next time, peace.